It's a video extra from the Mossad Files. I'm Dan Raviv, the co-author of 6 books about Israeli intelligence, strategy, and diplomacy. The most recent and inexpensive ebook called Target Iran, on how the Mossad penetrated Iran using, in recent years especially, non-Israeli agents trained as a kind of paramilitary force. But let's talk to another author, someone who knows a lot, absolutely on top of things. Here on the Mossad Files, we're joined once again by Yaakov Katz. You're the former editor-in-chief of the Jerusalem Post, but author or co-author of several books that are very, very relevant to what we're discussing today. The most recent, which we have talked about on the Mossad Files, quite right, While Israel Slept, How Hamas Surprised the Most Powerful Military in the Middle East. That's While Israel Slept. And I note that 15 years ago, you wrote a book called Israel versus Iran, The Shadow War, which, of course, last year in June and now this year, since February 28th, has become an active war, now in abeyance, sort of a ceasefire. Certainly Israel isn't bombing Iran every day. So, Yaakov Katz, let's bring it to personalities, because you wrote recently an article about Israel and the U.S., reached the zenith, kind of a high point of cooperation, going to war together, I think of February 28th especially, and the whole month of March until April 7th, Trump declared a ceasefire. So when it comes to Trump and Prime Minister Netanyahu, was that also, the high point of cooperation between a prime minister and a president? And where do you think that's heading now?
Well, Dan, it's always a pleasure to be with you, but 100%, I think what we saw on February 28th was the highest moment ever in the Israel-U.S. relationship in terms of a joint operation, Israeli F-15s, F-16s, F-35, flying alongside American fighter jets, refueled by one another, sitting and reading intelligence and going over maps, American and Israeli officers, dividing up targets. You take this, I'll take that, talking to each other on the radios while they're flying towards their target, helping one another. Unbelievable. But with that said, when we look at Israel's standing and position today in the United States, the support that it gets, and this is based on polls that are taken whether by Gallup or by Pew or others, we are seeing a significant decline, a very worrisome decline for people who, at least like me and you, who care about this relationship. We're seeing a decline in the American support of Israel, the general public support of Israel, and it's already crossing party lines. It's not that I could say it's one party or it's the other party. It's across the board, and this has to have us concerned and ask, why is this happening?
Let me ask you to clarify, because it's a trend that's been noticed in recent years, made worse by February 28th and the war that they're conducting together, because it seemed to be going that way in recent years, even after Israel was attacked. You wrote a whole book about it on October 7th of 2023. So it's even worse in this war?
Well, I think the war has caused it some damage. That's exactly the problem, right? If we look, for example, just one of the data points just important to look at, Pew does a running study every year of how Americans view Israel. And it found, the study on April 7th or 8th that it was taken, that 60% of Americans now have an unfavorable view of Israel. That's up from 53% just a year before. And it's a stunning figure when you look at it, because since 2022, favorable views of Israel have fallen by about 20 points. So how did we get to this point that now a majority of Americans have this unfavorable view? And I think that part of it is definitely the war and this perception that Prime Minister Netanyahu and Israel by large dragged the United States into this war. That word dragged is a word that you hear a lot in the U.S. media and by different politicians. Also, both sides of the aisle. There's, the isolationists on the Republican side and definitely the Democratic side, who saw this war as unwarranted and not needed and done without the powers that the president had, and maybe not with authorization. But they also looked at Israel and saying, one second, America did not have an imminent threat. America did not need to go to war. Now America got stuck in this war. They're still trying to figure out a way out of it. Who's the guy who dragged them in? That was Bibi, and that's Israel's fault. And therefore, we need to distance ourselves
Mm.
from the state of Israel.
Even though a fairer version of that, of course, is that Bibi Netanyahu was part of persuading Trump that this is a good time to act, because I believe Trump was leaning that way, probably in his ambitions for his second term. He was of a mind to hit Iran at some point so they could never have a nuclear weapon. So Netanyahu, in his frequent visits to Trump, right, we were always amazed, 7 times getting together, apparently persuaded Trump. But I want to talk about just a little bit the intelligence part of that too, because even some of the complaints by commentators and some in Congress, they also bring up the Mossad, right? And the insiders say the Mossad director, Dedi Barnea, made some of these trips and also was persuading the Americans that the regime in Iran really could be toppled. You think that's true?
There was a perception, a belief in Israel that the regime was weak, that the people were ripe for an uprising, that there was a moment, definitely in wake of last year. We're now just about a year after the 12-day war that took place in the summer in June of 2025, when Israel did most of the heavy lifting, but then Trump sent the B-2 bombers to help finish off some of the nuclear sites. But that was a mission that was focused just on nuclear and some of the missiles, but not the regime. And at the time, there was a sense within Israel that we could take on this regime and we could potentially lead to it to collapse. There were a number of pieces to the puzzle of how to do that. On the one hand, kinetically strike at regime targets. On the other hand, and this came even more to the forefront after the January public protests took place in Iran and people went to the streets to call for the Ayatollahs to step down. They were upset about a wide range of issues. It was nothing to do with Israel, but Israel then saw that and said, okay, this is the moment. Netanyahu goes to Washington and tries to persuade the president that, okay, we have a unique window of opportunity now to do it all. Further degrade Iran, further degrade the nuclear and the ballistic missile and the military, but also lead to the collapse of the regime. Barnea was part of that effort to persuade not only John Ratcliffe, his counterpart, director of the CIA, or Tulsi Gabbard, who now has just stepped down as the director of national intelligence. It was not only to persuade them, but also to help persuade the president, Marco Rubio, and the vice president, J.D. Vance. They thought, and maybe it could be that the Israelis oversold this idea, and it seems that they might have, that the regime could be toppled. There's been a variety of reports, Dan, and you've read them like I have, of exactly what the plan was going to be, whether it was going to be the Kurds who would come in armed. It was Mahmoud Ahmadinejad who was going to be installed, the former president, the Holocaust denier, the guy who called to wipe Israel off the map. He's now the person that Israel wanted. Unclear exactly what it was, but Israel thought there was this opportunity. For now, if Israel did make that argument in a strong way, well, they got it wrong.
Well, so I'm noticing that you're saying if on some of that. So I just want to know you, based on your sources, your intuition, your understanding of Israeli ideas that even the Mossad comes up with based on intelligence. I don't think trying to manipulate the U.S. to do something bad for the U.S., but of course their job is to try to get allies to help Israel do something good for Israel. So briefly, the Ahmadinejad subject, which we spoke about on the Mossad Files last week, by the way, with my writing partner, Yossi Melman, accepting that it really was an Israeli-U.S. plot, that the former president was aware that he would have been a tool of the Israelis, but it went wrong. So first, you believe that's true?
Yeah, I believe that Ahmadinejad was part of the plan. I don't think he was the plan, though. And I think that's just an important emphasis. It wasn't, there were a number of pieces to what Israel hoped to achieve and aimed to achieve. One of them, again, militarily, strike at the regime. There were bombings that took place towards the end of the aerial attacks against Iran. If you think back to March and beginning of April, that Israel started to bomb Basij. That's the local militia and police inside Iran that's meant to repress and suppress any public uprising that might be taking place in any city. They started to bomb checkpoints, random 2 Basij people standing at a checkpoint. A drone would drop a missile. And you say to yourself, why is Israel doing that? It's a waste of a bomb. I mean, 2 guys standing at a checkpoint in the middle of Tehran, what does that actually do? But when you think of the bigger picture, what Israel was trying to convey to the Iranian people, you take to the streets, we will have your back from the air to give you the supports and to help take out these different besieged checkpoints. So you had that was one component. The other component was the degradation of the regime and general targets. The other component was the Kurds. The other component was Mahmoud Ahmadinejad. And there were other pieces to this as well, right?
On the Kurdish part, the Kurdish forces, perhaps tens of thousands of armed Kurds would have marched from Kurdish Iraq, Kurdish Iran into the country, could have made a lot of trouble for Iran's military and especially the Revolutionary Guards, the IRGC. Okay, reasonable idea. Now, do you believe or perhaps even know, is it true that President Erdogan of Turkey, who hates the Kurds, convinced President Trump not to proceed with that part?
I have heard that from a number of people, yes. And to say that I know with every fiber of being, I can't say that, but I've heard it from a number of people with knowledge of what was happening, that seems to have been the case, and that was quashed. And therefore, it's easy to blame and say, well, Trump stopped us here and Ahmadinejad got cold feet there. But again, it was a plan that might not have been, and we still don't know the full scope of it because there were other pieces to it. There are different unions and student groups, and maybe we know that Israel, and that's your book that you and Yossi recently wrote about the use of Iranian proxies inside Iran by Israel for as agents, and so there were other pieces to this whole big pie and puzzle. But it could be that the plan itself might not have been as baked as it should have. But I'll just say one other thing, Dan, on this, because this is important to keep in mind. Israel is a country of 10 million people. Iran is a country of 90 million people, 9 times our size. The Mossad is a powerful agency. You know much more about the Mossad than I do and most people do. But as great of an intelligence agency that it is, to be able to manipulate the overthrowing of a regime is any day going to be very, very, very difficult, especially when you're dealing with a country like Iran, which is willing to go to unbelievable and not basically there are no breaks or no stops to survival, even killing their own people. And we saw them do that. And when you're dealing with such a large country also. So all those pieces together made this from the beginning a very difficult, I would say ambitious objective, anyhow.
Well, after the April 7th ceasefire began, which was Trump's idea, it became clear that Iran felt that it had forgive me, Trump card, that it had the strength, the power that it really hadn't exercised in the past to shut off shipping in the Gulf, to have a huge effect on international trade and, of course, the cost of energy everywhere on Earth, including in the United States, which affects Donald Trump deeply. As we know, gasoline and other prices are going up, and Trump has the midterm elections that his party faces in the fall. And the Strait of Hormuz has almost become the central point, even as President Trump still speaks about being sure that Iran will never have a nuclear program. The other subject that was so important and still is for Israel, that Iran not be able to build up a ballistic missile arsenal. And Trump is not focused on that. And that, I'd have to say, is bad for Israel. So the Strait of Hormuz issue, Israel not being involved in the negotiations that are extremely secretive. Who's talking? Is it ever face to face? Is it still Witkoff and Kushner? But Israel's not involved and perhaps being forgotten. So, as you wrote the other day, tell me, Yaakov, if we were at the height of cooperation, both militarily and politically, where are they now, U.S. and Israel?
Well, the Israeli government, and I would say, is still very much trying. And you get this sense, Dan, because you can read between the lines also. When the prime minister is quiet and when you're not seeing this rise above the surface, the disappointment and the frustration, there's a reason why. And I think that, Netanyahu is being quiet on Iran specifically, less about Lebanon, that's a different topic. But on the Iran deal, he's being quiet because I think he has two ideas in mind. Number one is he wants to continue to try to influence the process. As long as there's not yet a deal, he has the ability to try to move the president in the direction of where he would like to see this happen. And we know that Jared Kushner, Steve Witkoff are the ones who are running point definitely on those negotiations. Have to wait to see, but also important to keep in mind what they're talking about now is an extension of the ceasefire and then by 60 days and within that time frame to try to get a deal. But to get to the 60-day extension, they have to agree already on what the basic outline and the borders of that deal would look like. The second thing that Netanyahu has in mind, is that deep down, he has a hope that this will fail and that the president will order once again strikes against Iran. Now, it's not that Netanyahu wants more war just for the purpose of war, but
his critics say he does, just to
and his critics say he does.
Critics say,
and I know how to be one of his great critics as well. But I think in this case, what he wants to do is something that I think makes complete sense. The Iranians right now, they're riding high. They feel like they have the upper hand in these negotiations. They need to get a hit to understand and to give up and to come into a better deal for the United States, for Israel, and for the region. And therefore, some more attacks against them would convey that. So like when they bomb the Kuwaiti International Airport and get away with it, what do they think? When they call for a ceasefire in Lebanon, otherwise they're walking away from the ceasefire talks with America, and they get that as well, they feel they got the upper hand right now in these negotiations. So if there can be another round of kinetic attacks against the Iranians, maybe that will help a better deal from at least the region and America's perspective in terms of what the Iranians are going to give on the nuclear, on the missiles, on the proxies, and on their own people.
Okay, yet Yaakov, you know that if Iran stands firm, despite another round of airstrikes, if it were to occur, if the regime stands firm, then they will claim that they're winning by surviving. And there will be a lot of Iranians who say, oh, man, you just can't get them out of power. It's a chancy thing, even to do more airstrikes. But let me shift to one other thing, because you're suggesting that Netanyahu is not complaining about being left out of the talks, maybe getting some disrespect from Trump. Did I say maybe? I mean, a source report that Trump practically confirmed that he said on the phone to Bibi Netanyahu, you are effing, he didn't do the polite version, you are effing crazy. You know, why are you bombing in Lebanon? Sort of ruining Trump's idea of how to proceed to open the Strait of Hormuz, which is not Israel's biggest interest. Okay. So, you know, Bibi in one interview in English this week, sort of said, it's a family dispute. Basically, we're together. What other choice does he have, right? Trump is showing once in a while that he's angry. By the way, there was a Trump interview this week, too. He said, sometimes I get angry, right? But we're still friends. So what's your assessment?
No, I think that there's definite tension right now. There's tension because Donald Trump really wants a deal. And we could speculate what exactly is the reason. World Cup? Is it July 4th, the 250th anniversary that's coming up, a lot of celebrations? Is it that he's just fed up? Is it the midterms? Or is it a mix of everything? Oil prices, gas prices? It's probably a bit of each. But with that said, that he wants a deal, Israel has real security problems, right? The north of Israel is being hammered, pounded by Hezbollah. Israeli soldiers are being killed, unfortunately, a few just this week by these FPVs, by these drones that Hezbollah is using very effectively. If we stop the war now in Lebanon, as has been decided, I mean, I would go as far as to say, Dan, that Hezbollah might have won that war because not only have they survived in Lebanon, they will rebuild. They have the linkage now that's been created between Iran and Lebanon is now even tighter with American validation and legitimacy.
When there was reason to hope that had been weakened, that Iran wouldn't have any more money to send to Hezbollah. There'd be pressure from the Lebanese government. Instead, it may well be that the Tehran-Hezbollah link is strengthened.
And that's not good for us. I don't think that's good for the world. And as a result, that there is real tension because Israel wants to do more against Hezbollah and Trump wants to do more to get the Iranians into a deal. And right now, we're not seeing eye to eye on all these issues. But I would also suggest the following. You know this as well as I do. Presidents and prime ministers always have tension. Presidents and prime ministers are always going to have issues, right? Israel has Hezbollah on its border. America does not. Israel has Iran within firing range, and that's we've been hit by their ballistic missiles. America does not. And therefore, there's always going to be a different perception of the severity, of the magnitude of the threat. But with that said, what we've always seen is that most of the times they know how to work together. I'm confident that Netanyahu will figure this out also for one very important reason, at least from his perspective. Don't forget, Israel has an election of its own coming up. It will be held, has to be held by the end of October, is likely potentially going to be moved up to middle or beginning of September. And Netanyahu does not want to go to the Israeli electorate with a feeling that he does not get along with Donald Trump. One of his great selling cards and one of the assets that he claims to have is I know how to work with Donald Trump unlike anyone else. I know how to derive strategic benefits from Donald Trump unlike any of my contenders. And now if that's starting to feel strained and that symbol or that story is being shattered, that could be problems for him at the polls. So he's going to want to fix this before then.
Okay, Yaakov, we have some more territory to cover. I'm speaking here on the Mossad Files with Yaakov Katz, well known as the former editor-in-chief of the Jerusalem Post, a defense analyst and author of books. The most recent, I always want to get this title right, very important when mentioning someone's excellent book, While Israel Slept, How Hamas Surprised the Most Powerful Military in the Middle East. Let me ask you, you mentioned the FPV drones that Hezbollah is using that apparently the IDF, the Israelis, despite being the inventors of Iron Dome and other systems, what's an FPV drone? What do the letters even stand for?
FPV stands for first person view. Basically, this idea that I can wear goggles and I can literally fly the drone in an immersive way. So what the drone's camera sees, I see. And as if I'm sitting in the driver's seat, flying this drone wherever it goes. In this case, what makes these drones really difficult for Israel to stop and intercept is that they also fly by the wire. In other words, they are connected by cable, fiber optic cable, from the drone itself to the operator. So they can fly 30 kilometers. They have a spool of wiring, very thin, very lightweight, that keeps going out as it flies. And what that means is that if I am Israel in this case, and I have different radio jamming technologies, electronic warfare technologies, they're not effective against these drones because usually with drones that just fly at a radio frequency, I kill the radio frequency, drone comes down. Here, because it's by the wire, you cannot you can't jam it. So you either
Wow.
have to cut the wire or you have to somehow detect and intercept from a distance, which is very difficult because they're very small, they're very slow moving, and they fly very low. So standard radar technology does not detect them in the same way that we would want them to. And that's why they've been having this success.
They have been killing and wounding Israeli soldiers, some of whom, a lot of whom right now, are on the Lebanese side of the border. As I said, only a few minutes left for some big topics here. So, how about the idea that seems to have accelerated lately at a time like this, that the annual military aid to Israel from the United States be replaced by partnership? Right? There's a Netanyahu statement that a Republican congressman released this week to support the idea of ending the aid as a gift. Netanyahu wrote, Israel deeply appreciates the financial component of the military aid the U.S. has generously provided us over the years. The time has now arrived for us to move from aid recipient to partner. How's that going to work? And would that hurt Israel's defenses?
Well, there's a couple of pieces just for the context. Number one is that the aid package that went into effect was signed by President Obama in 2016 is coming up for expiration next year in 2027. And therefore, Israel needs to negotiate a new package. This was a 10-year package. It was the biggest package, $38 billion, $3.8 billion a year, money that Israel could use to buy weapons in the United States. And that's how it buys combat aircraft, refueling tankers, weapons, etc. Netanyahu knows that a couple of things. Number one, he knows that no matter who the president is in the future, Republican or Democrat, it's going to be very hard to ever get again another MOU, a memorandum of understanding, another aid package. The Republicans are moving more in an isolationist perspective. In some cases, the Democrats definitely moving away from Israel. We see that in the polling numbers. So this is the last chance to potentially get any package. Now, with Donald Trump, the question then is compounded by what does Trump like to do? Now, we know, based on Trump's own remarks, he doesn't like to give away money anywhere in the world. He doesn't like this idea of foreign aid. He likes to bring money into America. He doesn't like to send money elsewhere. And therefore, he could say to himself, I don't want to just give money. So Netanyahu knows that. So he wants to change the conversation. That's why he's saying, and he said in a 60 Minutes interview, I want to wind it down to zero over the next 10 years. Now, he didn't just randomly say over the next 10 years. Over the next 10 years is the term of another MOU. So he wants to get to zero, but he also wants to change the way it's perceived. It's not just a handout, it is a partnership. Now, what could that partnership look like, Dan? There's a lot of ideas. Number one is let's together, Israel and America, build the next generation of missile defense systems. Let's together build the next generation of quantum computing for military application. Let's look into the next weapons and the next drones. Let's do it together. So development and production together. And
but how does Israel then obtain an incredibly expensive plane like the F-35? Does Israel have the budget to buy a squadron of F-35s?
Israel has the money if it wants to have the money on its own. It does. But for years, we've been able to get this money, part of this money, this 3.8 billion. It's not the entire defense budget, obviously. It's a fraction of it, but it's a nice percentage. You're able to get it from the United States. That gives you more ability to use your resources differently. But Israel isn't a poor country. I don't think that's the conversation. My support for the MOU all these years and for the military aid has been that it solidifies and strengthens the connection between our militaries because Israel and America use the same weapons. The money has to be spent in America, and American companies then want to sell it to Israel. And then the Senate and Congress and State Department and the White House want to approve those deals. So it just, and by the way, you saw that play out on February 28th when our Air Forces all flew together because they know, because they work together on the same systems.
So it's important to Israel that part be preserved, that you'll still work together, develop things together. The financing is going to change, and it's going to change inevitably.
It's going to change no matter what. But I want to add one other element to this because I think it's very interesting. The last MOU, the one that's coming to an end, came in 2016 in the aftermath of the JCPOA, which was the Iran nuclear deal that Barack Obama reached with the Islamic Republic. Everyone remembers how Netanyahu fought tooth and nail against that deal, went to Congress, gave a very controversial speech against the sitting president of America. But in the aftermath, because everyone understood the deal had holes, was dangerous for Israel, and Obama was now being perceived as having done that to Israel, there was an opportunity to get a bigger package. And they did. And Obama was able to say, I gave Israel the largest military aid package in history. And Netanyahu was able to say, bad deal, didn't stop it, but now we got the package. We're at another moment again, Dan, very similar to that. Now, the aid package is coming to an end. There's going to be a new nuclear deal that's going to have issues for Israel and its long-term security. And therefore, it's a window of opportunity, I think, for us to once again engage with the administration, this time Donald Trump, and say, listen, you're going to have to shore up and show the world and Israel that you still have Israel's back. Israel is going to want to show, yeah, we might have gotten a bad deal, but we can get another MOU, another package, partnership, however you want to look at it. Everybody has to have a good story to tell. This is the opportunity to get another good MOU for all sides that will also, in the end result, which is most important to me, help keep Israel secure.
Yaakov Katz, just take a couple of minutes on another very current subject, because just now, at the beginning of June, General Goffman is taking over the Mossad, a controversial choice by Bibi Netanyahu on the smallest level. We've also mentioned on the Mossad Files, he reportedly barely speaks English, and usually the Mossad director has great friends in the CIA and other U.S. agencies, and maybe that'll be hard for Goffman. That's the smallest thing. Are you highly concerned, as Netanyahu's critics are, that Netanyahu is replacing all the leaders of the military and intelligence with people in his own image, which I think is no surprise when you've been prime minister almost 20 years? What do you think?
I hear the concern and I understand the concern. And the question will really be, the proof will be in the pudding. Will Roman Goffman, the new director of the Mossad, stand up to the prime minister and to the government and stand by the principles and the morals and the ethics that have guided the Mossad until now and know how to say no and have that backbone. And the same applies to David Zini, who's the director of the Shin Bet. It's hard for us to know at this point, but I will say this about Roman Goffman. He has an illustrious, distinguished, accomplished career in the IDF, rising to the rank of a major general. He fought courageously on October 7th, drove down south, got into a gun battle with Hamas terrorists, and got wounded in that battle. So he's not a guy who just sits on the sidelines and doesn't fight. And I think that we have to wait to see what type of head of Mossad he will be. It will have to be vigilant to watch because of what those critics are worried about. But look, Netanyahu's the prime minister. He was elected by the people. Of course, he has the right to appoint the people that he wants to see in those jobs. And if those critics have a problem with that, I have a good answer for them. Go to the elections and win, and then make those changes. But until then, we can't complain about every single appointment and be worried about every single appointment.
But as an outside observer of the intelligence agencies, I think you'd agree that it has often happened that the Mossad director represents his people, including his top analysts on just about any subject, and warns the prime minister that the idea you're discussing in cabinet is not a good idea according to my experts in the Mossad. You have to hope that Roman Goffman will still do that when required.
100%. And look, we have two examples that we could look at, right? Dani Yatom was an example of someone who embarked on an operation that did not go well, went south. This was the Khalid Mashal assassination attempt in Jordan. And he came in from the IDF and did not turn out to be a good Mossad director and stepped down, I think, maybe a year and a half, 2 years into his term. On the other hand, Meir Dagan, probably the most legendary Mossad directors ever, was also an IDF general who was parachuted in by Ariel Sharon to lead the Mossad, I think 2001 or 2002, and really changed the Mossad, making it this lethal, powerful, combative organization and powerful organization that it is today. So that was a success. Who will Roman Goffman be? Too early for us to know, Dan, but I 100% agree that as an observer, close observers of this, we have to keep watch, because if it turns out to not be good, that will have to be called out right away.
A political issue, yet another, maybe even for this year's election. Yaakov Katz, thanks so much for spending this time here on the Mossad Files again. Always so much ground to cover. And everybody, While Israel Slept. That's the title of your excellent book with Amir Bochbot, I believe, yes?
Yes.
Right, about what happened on October 7th and the failures on the Israeli side. Yaakov Katz, thank you very much again for joining me.
Thank you.
My thanks to Yaakov Katz and to any of you who are watching this on YouTube, Spotify, other platforms. Keep in mind, there is an audio podcast every week, the Mossad Files with Dan Raviv. We talk about things like this with Americans, Israelis, other experts. So look for it on all the audio podcast platforms, the Mossad Files. And just a quick book plug, if I may, together with Israeli journalist Yossi Melman, I have written books, 6 of them, that are relevant to these topics. The most recent, an inexpensive ebook called Target Iran, and also a wider history of the Mossad and other security agencies. It's called Spies Against Armageddon: Inside Israel's Secret Wars. So for now, I'm Dan Raviv. Thanks a lot for watching.